Hello and welcome to this edition of B.E.P Talks. Very special guest today that I am so happy to be able to introduce all of you to is Paul Lawrence Vann. Paul, thanks so much for joining us on B.E.P Talks today.
Beth, I'm honored to be here with you, and thank you so much for allowing me on your amazing platform.
Well, you are so kind, and I got to jump into this. You have an amazing story to share. And let me just give a little background information to our viewers. You are a leadership consultant, you're a public speaker, you're a best-selling author. You come to us with so much history in your own life, so much credibility. And let's make sure we mention your 20 years of military experience in the United States in the Air Force, where you retired as a lieutenant colonel. So most importantly, thank you so much for your service to the United States of America.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I cannot thank you enough. And that experience gave you some other interesting experience, including working at the U.S. House of Representatives with Congress. Tell us a little bit about what your experience in Congress was.
Well, Beth, thank you so much for asking me about my experience in Congress. And I was working at the Pentagon at the time, and there was this advertisement that came out. They were looking for military officers to become Capitol Hill Fellows. So I applied for it the first year and I didn't get it. So I applied for it the next year. And when I applied, I interviewed with over 20 members of Congress. And I was actually picked up by a member of Congress who was on the House Armed Services Committee. So I was a major in the Air Force at that time, and I accepted the position. So my responsibility was to advise him on military-related issues because that's the committee he was on. And I worked there for 1 year, and I drafted language for bills. One of the most important bills I ever drafted, Beth, was on military funeral honor duties.
Oh, wow.
And that's so important because you only get one chance to get it right, and a member of Congress was not able to get the honor guard to come out there, so the family missed that one and only opportunity they had. And so I drafted up language, and I gave that language to one of the legal attorneys on Capitol Hill, and he drafted into law, and it became a bill, and it became a law.
Well, thank you for that, because we've all seen that moment too many times. If we've seen it once, it's too many times, but we've seen it sadly over and over again. And now to know that you played a role in that, thank you. It's heart-wrenching. And you said that they lost that opportunity that those families so deserved.
To
have that moment, So thank you again for doing that. When you talk about military, I mean, you were a lieutenant colonel, obviously tremendous experience. And the word I always connect with someone of a title like that and based on is leadership.
Yes.
It's leadership. And I know that you are an expert in leadership, so much so that you help companies, organizations establish leadership within themselves.
Absolutely.
And I mentioned that you're a public speaker, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's largely what you do in your public speaking.
That's correct. I do the public speaking in addition to providing leadership development workshops. I've designed digital leadership courses, consulting, and I've written the book, Leadership is Influence. So it's an entire suite of different programs and tools that organizations can use to help them to improve their bottom line, maximize their human potential, in addition to increasing their return on talent management as well.
And you certainly have the cred to be able to be the one teaching that. I understand that you have what we're going to call a three-pronged approach to developing leadership within your company, within an organization. And leadership is kind of one of those big umbrella words, but there's so many different types of leadership. I'm going to ask you if you'd be so kind as to share with us a little bit about what your keynote speeches are all about, focusing on that three-pronged approach. Can we get you to do that for us?
Absolutely, Beth. I look forward to it.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn it over to you. So here, with no further ado, here now, retired Lieutenant Colonel, I'm so proud, I want to say that, retired Lieutenant Colonel Paul Lawrence Vann.
Yes, when it comes to leadership, I like to put the focus on influential leadership. And people ask, well, Paul, what is influential leadership? Well, influential leadership is a leader who is a leader servant, meaning they position their managers and their employees to really excel at what they do. In other words, the influential leader is so influential that you don't even know if he or she is there. In other words, they delegate to their manager, to their employees, and the manager and employees figure it out on their own with the influential leader, giving them the tools they need to succeed for the organization. And I think that is the most powerful form of influential leadership. Now, what I'm going to do is share with you the three-pronged approach so you can get a better idea. But before I get started, I want to talk about the fact that a person does not have, an employee does not have to have the title of a leader to be a leader. In fact, I go so far as to say that a manager is a leader as well as an employee. I'm going to define them both. First, I'll start with the manager leader. The manager leader, they determine what the workflow is for the employee leaders. In other words, they do the management of the workflow for the employee. For example, when I used to work at UPS, I would have the supervisor would come to me and say, Paul, I need you to sort these packages to these three trucks, and you have a loader for that particular truck, and so that's a manager leader. Now, the employee, the person who is loading that particular truck or those three trucks, they are leaders too because they have to get X amount of boxes in that truck so it can make the delivery on time when the driver's there to get it distributed throughout the state or across the state lines. And in my particular case, as a student at Shaw University, it was in Raleigh, North Carolina, the hub that they had there. And so now I want to talk about the fact that we have a three-pronged approach. Starting with number one, it is all about continuous study. In other words, when you become a good leader, you need to study your craft. And in this particular case, leadership. So one can get books on leadership. For example, when I worked in the Pentagon, one day I was walking and I lost my sight. And people ask, well, why did you lose your sight, Paul? I lost my sight because there was a gentleman walking down the hall, a military officer. He had 4 stars on. He was a 4-star general. It's not any old 4-star general. It was General Colin Powell walking down the hall. And what a surprise it was for me. And of course, I introduced myself to him. But what it did, I started to study and read all of his books. I was actually in the same building with him, the 5-sided building, the Pentagon. And so I observed him in meetings, and I would see him in the hall, I would see him at lunch. And so it was continuous study, and not only through books, but also it doesn't have to be a person in a leadership role with a leadership title at your company. It could be another company. It could be someone, for example, with Amazon, or it could be with a company such as Boeing. So there are different leaders everywhere, and you can study them, but you do it from a continuous standpoint. It's not a one and done, but it's continuous. The first day you're on the job until, if you're 20 years later, 20 years on the job. So that's step one. Step two, what we need to do when it comes to leadership is we need to give employees leadership responsibilities. For example, when I work with Mobile Oil Company in Beaumont and Houston, Texas, one of the things that we used to do is have what we call turnaround. And what turnaround consists of is we provide maintenance on the building so that everything will work properly. And as a result, we would have a team leader. It would be an engineer, chemical engineer. I worked the financial piece, which means I provided the budget for them to do everything they needed, the parts they needed, and the shipping, and then paying the employees. It was everything involved with that. So we would put on a special project. And so that is step two, is to provide that leadership experience. And then the next step in the process is to actually receive leadership development training or attend leadership development workshops. And why this is important? Because leadership development is professional development and professional growth. And in terms of a person becoming a leader, you have to go through a cycle, not just one course, but one, two, three courses until we build an individual into a leader. And not just any old leader, as the title of my book states, a leader of influence. And that leader of influence is an individual that when that leader with the title, let's say it's the president of the company, the vice president of human resources, HR, and they were to be promoted and or they were to be transferred or retired, you need someone to step into the gap and take over. So there's some succession that is working in there as well. And there's also, when you have a new leader coming on board, there's a culture that's shaped by this. The main goal of a leader is to be able to do this, to improve the business performance of a company in our organization, not only at the headquarters level, but in the regional level in terms of being able to receive the same standardized leadership training, and also at the local level. So we have the headquarters, regional, and the local. And of course, if we know if it's a small business, it may be a little bit different, but that is the gist of it. And one of the primary things that I really love to talk about is the fact that there's no born leaders. Sometimes people think, well, we have the quarterback, Tom Brady, and I'm a Tom Brady fan. He played with the Patriots and then went on to Tampa Bay. And they say he's a born leader. Yea, verily, he is not. And no one ever can be a born leader because genetically, that is not part of how a person becomes a leader, of an influential leader or a born leader. The fact of the matter is a leader is developed over time. And that's really what we're working with. And the primary reason why I talk about leadership, and I wrote the book, Leadership is Influence, is because I wanted people to understand just because they don't have leadership experience, that in essence, they are a leader. So how could a person be a leader if they don't have the title of a leader? Everyone has a life to live, and we have to lead our lives, right, wrong, or indifferent. Some leaders are better than other leaders. And why is it important to lead our lives? Because we have to make important decisions, and with every decision that we make, there are consequences that go along with it. And that's another reason why. And there's no born leader, because when I played football in high school and I ran track in high school and ran track in college, I never saw one born leader ever. In other words, can you imagine a person being born with cleats on, or with shoulder pads on, or track shoes on, sprinting shoes on? Because you never see it, because there's no such thing as a born leader. Another aspect that I really love working about is working with women, because it's unfortunately, when it comes to women and leadership, a lot of times women are not recognized, but they are equally as good leaders as men are. And I'll give you some examples of some things that happen when women are put into a leadership role. They increase the productivity of an organization. They help push the narrative on the company in terms of it's a great company to work for. Women are known for fairness, which is another really important aspect. And not only that, but women also promote more people, and they're smarter than men. And I know this is going to turn the men off, but women are more educated than men. And I talk about this in one of my keynote speeches, primarily because women only represent 10% of the Fortune 500 companies, but that number should be triple at this point. But a lot of times they're bumping into that glass ceiling, but I believe that that glass ceiling is going to be not only broken, but it's going to be removed completely, because when we look at the population, of birth rates, there are more women than men. And so at some point, the men are going to retire, but we don't have to wait that long for that to happen. Here are some ways in which we can develop women leaders in Fortune 500 companies, small businesses, mid-sized companies. Number one, we have to identify the women who have the potential. And you say, well, how do you identify them? Well, I'll share a little story with you. I had a friend named Kathy. She was a chemical engineer from Texas A&M University, smart as anyone walking planet Earth. So Kathy would be identified as a prospective and potential leader. The second step that we want in this process is to assign Kathy to a advocate for her, someone, a man or woman already in the leadership position, and they bring her in and do what we call, she would shadow them. In other words, she would watch and see what they do, and so she can start building up her particular leadership skills and her particular leadership abilities. And then the third thing is to ensure that she's on that track where she can succeed. We have to position her to succeed. But the bottom line is this: when women are in a leadership position, the work becomes better. And it's been proven by the American Psychological Association, and they state in there that women have the better personality, they have more empathy, which is very important today, given this post pandemic environment that we happen to be in. And so women understand better, and they also are able to still get the job done. But again, they have this barrier that men don't have, and the hurdle in life. And that hurdle in life is that other people don't believe that women should be leaders, but they should be. And I can use my mother as an example. She worked for a factory for 28 years. You talk about work ethic. My God, she had it. My father worked for the same company 27 years. So we start to look at a pattern, and we want to be able to put women in those positions where they can succeed. And that's what I will be talking about in a presentation in Paris, France in the June timeframe. And so when it comes down to leadership, we all know that it is one of the most important skills and abilities that people should have. And the reason why is because it's what moves organizations forward. We have this category that comes out annually of the best places to work. And the best places to work uh, includes who the leader happens to be. Typically, a successful company is and has a leader of influence, and they would be able to have that, take that influence and be able to get people to do things they really don't want to do. For example, I served over 20 years in the Air Force, and people would ask me, well, does the sergeant scream at you, or does the general scream at you? Absolutely not. That's in TV and movies. In real life, it really comes down to how you respect that person. And so we're looking at a new workforce and a new workplace today is no longer the type where people scream at anyone. And I'll give you an example. There was a Army colonel who was going to be promoted to general, but something happened. And this is all leadership based. What happened was that he would talk to one of his subordinates in front and scream at them in front of his colleagues, which is a no-no. And what would happen, he was considered one of the worst supervisors or bosses that they had ever had. And as I wrote in my book, Leadership as Influence, you do not want to be considered the worst boss or supervisor that anyone had, or leader for that fact. And so we have to be very sharp about how we approach things. And leadership is one of the type of things that is the most highly valued. And so people ask, well, how can you help the youth? Someone asked me this earlier today. And I said, I love to work with college and university students because the sooner they learn how to become a leader, the better off their life is going to be. And how do they get experience? Well, you can also get experience as a leader by volunteering for an organization. And by volunteering for an organization, typically when it comes to volunteers, a lot of people don't show up. So you'll be elevated very quickly. So you don't have to get that experience as the step two in the three-pronged process. You can actually get it from a nonprofit organization that you advocate for, and you can also get it from any other organization that happens to be out there, and that would help. And my example, I have two Generation Z children, and I became the parent teacher organization president for 2 years. I never knew how strong I was until I did that. Because once I did that, then I had not only the students to be concerned with, but also the parents and the school staff. We raised $25,000 the first year that the PTO ever existed at this new school. And the second year, we raised another 25,000. But in that process, I was learning, improving my leadership skills, even though I had retired. And I helped other people who were on the board as well, the vice president, the secretary, and the treasurer. And so we all learn through that process. And so leadership is something that we do every single day. There's no off days for leadership, and it's something that we all must do. And my calling card to everyone who is listening to this is for you to understand that leadership and position yourself to be the best leader you can be in your personal life. That should be your number one goal, because the better decisions that you can make as a leader, things such as having good relationships with your family members, having good relationships with your neighbors, having good relationships in your community, and then of course with your country as well, because we can volunteer for things even on a national level. But it's important individually, but also professionally. You are a leader. If you're an employee on your first day, guess what? You're a leader, and you'll catch up a little bit later with the continuous study, with position yourself into leadership positions, and then number three, receiving that leadership training to certify that you have put in the time and you have put in the effort to be the best leader that you can be. If you look at an organization and it's successful, and I've been a part of many organizations in the Air Force that receive organizational excellence awards, the primary difference between that and the organization that didn't was that we focused on becoming the best organization we could. And we focused on it because the leader understood the importance of us really understanding leadership and being the leaders, because someone is always watching you. I'll give you just another example before I wrap things up. And the example is this. When we look at the summer of 2023 and we look at the number of worker strikes or strikes that took place with different companies, companies, for example, such as the UAW, the United Auto Workers, the Screen Actors Guild, Kaiser Permanente, and we can also add in that category UPS, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But if we look at just a few of those organizations, UAW, in the first 10 days, they lost $5 billion. And this was all based on a leadership decision. And that leadership decision was, well, we're not going to let the union and employees get what they want. We're going to let them go on strike and they'll come back begging to us. But that didn't happen, because when the work stoppages occurred, the company started losing money. And once the company started losing money, well, the shares, the stock, and the stockholders, they're going to knock on the door and they're going to ask, are you going to wrap this up, or are you going to let this continue? And eventually it stopped. And now the company is trying to recoup those losses. Kaiser Permanente, the doctors did not go on strike, but the nurses and the other staff went on strike. Imagine that happening. And one of the most important things that people can have is healthcare. Well, healthcare is a leadership issue as well. And so let's look at my past employee in college. For 4 years, I put in blood, sweat, and tears at UPS so I could pay my tuition, because being one of 10 children, I did never received a penny from my parents because they did not have a penny to give me, and I understood that. So I went on and got a job, and I worked 4 years of college prior to being commissioned as a second lieutenant into the United States Air Force. So UPS was going on strike. It was time to renew that contract, and this is what happened. The leader of UPS decided, we're not even going to go there. We're not even going to talk about a strike. What do you want, union and employees? Union employees told them what they want. The drivers in the small brown trucks now receive $170,000 per year to drive those trucks. And guess what? This is the first time they've ever had air conditioning in those small trucks. First time. But they were able to create, the company UPS were able to create goodwill with the union and the employees. And so the next time a strike comes up and time to renew the contract, I don't think they're going to have a problem with a strike either. But when you have a strike, it definitely points to a lack of leadership, because they should be able to work this out. And how do I know this? Oh, I'm glad that you asked. My father was a union president for 20 years. So I'm sitting there listening to him talking. He's talking to Joe Califano, right? AFL-CIO and all types of leadership people. And they would send him out to speak. And so I learned about negotiating at a very young age, and negotiation is a part of leadership as well. Good communication skills, in addition to having empathy and also being able to delegate. And number one for leaders is to be able to solve problems. That is the number one thing. But when it comes to a leader, what is the number one thing? It's character. What is the character of that leader? Because the character of the leader defines who they are and what that organization is all about. And so, in conclusion, I thank you all for listening to what I shared in return in terms of leadership and leadership being one of influence, and sharing my three-pronged approach to becoming a leader of influence. Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness, Paul, I learned so much from you. I'm taking lots of notes here. One of the last things you said was character,
Yes.
integrity
Integrity. Yes.
in life itself, no matter what.
Being
And
able to trust.
and I believe that people choose their leaders.
Yes.
It has nothing to do, and you mentioned this, about just having a title.
Yes.
Titles often are given for assortment of reasons, not always the best of reasons, and moving people up the ladder and just giving them another title where they've actually lost. We know that is the Peter principle, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that happens a lot. You also mentioned Tom Brady.
Yes. One
Yes,
of my favorites.
one of your favorites. Well, he might be replaced now by Patrick Mahomes,
I
right?
think so.
He might be the GOAT. He
He's
might
the
be the
GOAT.
GOAT. But interesting that Tom Brady on the field definitely was a leader in that situation.
Absolutely.
And kind of following up on one of the other points, he wasn't born with, shoulder pads and a helmet and spikes and everything else, cleats, whatever the football guys are wearing these days. But
Exactly.
he had great skill
Yes.
and he had opportunity because he was not the starting quarterback. The starting quarterback got injured, and that gave him an opportunity.
Yes. And see,
So
again,
training has a lot to do with stepping up into your leadership role.
yes. And I think and it goes exactly what you said, Beth. He was developed over time. He was
Why? Because he had one of the greatest coaches.
yes, one of the greatest. And how could the Washington Commanders pass on him? I still don't understand.
That's another conversation.
That's another one.
Well, we were just talking about Patrick Mahomes, but he has one of the greatest coaches also in Andy Reid.
Absolutely.
Or you take the best in any sport, they have coaches.
Yes.
They have coaches. Anybody. So that goes back to your point in your first prong. Number one, your first prong approach is continuous study.
You have to.
Continuous learning, and I am such an advocate of that, is that it never says the end, until we take our last breath, we always should be in that mode of wanting to know more, because when you know more, you can serve better, you can give more, and you can have greater influence over more people.
Absolutely.
God, it makes so much sense. I cannot let you go without addressing the whole women in leadership, because B.E.P Talks is in association with the Global Society of Empowered Women, and we have tens of thousands of women from all around the world who believe that in ourselves,
sure,
in our ability to lead, and especially in the household,
yes,
where the future leaders are. So I always kind of go back to that great line, the hand that rocks the cradle.
That's correct.
And you're a very smart man. I know you're one of 10 children. God bless your parents, who said that women, we have different perspectives of what's fair.
Yes.
I think women are better arbitrators, therefore better negotiators, as you said, is such an important part. And
they can do more with less a lot of times.
They can do better at multitasking.
Multitasking, absolutely.
Better
and mothers. Yes, and mothers are the center of the family. It's not the father, it's the mothers.
It's absolutely the mother. It's absolutely the mother. And when you were talking about, you only see that in the movies, the military where, the drill sergeant and everything else, because there's a difference between being a leader and being a boss.
That's true. Very true.
And there's a difference between being a boss and being bossy.
That's a good point.
So it's the nuances, it's the finesse that you want to kind of coach not well, in any sense of the word, that whether it's your employees, your children, whoever it is, that you help them discover that they always had the solution within them, and the leader just kind of helps to bring it out. You don't tell them what to do, because in our society, if someone is just, that's a dictator. A leader, a best leader you would never, ever, ever feel is doing that to you. They just kind of bring you along in your own time.
Exactly. Yes.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's like a coach. A coach doesn't give you the answers because they know that you have the answer inside of you. They just help you to draw it out.
You know, and my dad, who clearly was my mentor, was a coach. He coached thousands of kids. He was an entrepreneur, a business owner, and he was really a wonderful go-to person. But he would say, "Well, what do you think? How do you feel about it? What do you think? Why do you feel that way?" And really, when you just hear yourself kind of saying it out loud, it's like, oh, the light bulb kind of goes off. And that's great leadership, when you help someone realize, like in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, you had the power all along.
That's
you
right.
always had the power. You were just looking in the wrong place. Let me ask you something.
Sure.
Concern for the younger generation today with what the world is going through, with so many lack of really good, authentic leadership, as you were discussing, leadership with integrity and character, and not just about winning, but negotiating and making it fair. My definition of fair is that if it's not fair for everyone, it's not fair for anyone. I think that's kind of logical. Is the younger generation looking for their leaders in all the wrong places?
I believe that and a great question, Beth. I think that young people are still trying to find out who they are. And because I have, as I mentioned, I have 2 Generation Z children. And I think that they want leadership, but they don't want you to tell them leadership. I think a lot of them want to learn it on their own, but sometimes you're going to have to learn from others in order to do that. It's a process where you pass the torch process. Kind of like when I was on the track team, I was on the relay team, someone would pass me the baton, so hopefully I could win it for the team. And that's the same thing it is for young people today. They approach things a lot differently for one reason: the technology they have in their hand, called that cell phone. And oftentimes I believe that if a child is on a cell phone 18, 20, 24 hours a day, they're defeating themselves, because you bought the phone didn't buy you. If you think that's a smartphone, that phone isn't smart. You're smart, right? The phone didn't create people. We created the phone.
Well, I like what you said. You bought the phone, and then eventually the phone starts to own you, because it is actually controlling you. Correct. In how you spend your time. And yes, I'm glad that you said that. Technology, it's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
The yin and the yang, the good and the bad, and like everything else, it's about the balance.
Absolutely. It's about the balance. And, I look at it because I have a 17-year-old son, so he likes his phone. And I said, well, could you survive without your phone? The answer is yes. Right? It's yes. We know you can. We know because we did. And so when I showed them a pay phone, I happened to see one here in Maryland where I'm located, and they asked me, what is that? You put the quarter in there.
Isn't that crazy?
Like, that's a phone? Yeah.
That's a phone.
How do you communicate with people? We wrote letters. I wrote my aunts in New York. I have family in Long Island, and they taught at Amityville High School. And I said, we wrote letters. We talked to them on the phone. And that's what we did. But see, nowadays, for some people, if you take their phone away, they'll start crying.
I know, they're lost. It's like, I am from Long Island. I know Amityville very well, not just from the horror from the movie. Everybody knows Amityville, but I know Amity very, very well. So wonderful. You have shed such positive light and such logical light, if you will, on what leadership is and how to develop it. And I think you become a leader. Remember the game, Follow the Leader? Hello? Yeah. Follow the leader to become a leader.
Correct.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're going to be doing an event in Paris. Share a little bit about that.
I would love to, and thank you so much. I was contacted by organization, and it's a women's forum, economic forum, and they want people to come out and talk about leadership. And one of my areas happen to be how to develop more women leaders. Because when I looked at that statistic for Fortune 500, only 10.6%, and that happens to be the highest it's ever been, and
Yeah,
that was in 2022, then there's a lot more room for a lot more progress there.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that number should be more in the 30 to 40 range.
yeah.
And so
Yes,
I go out there and talk to them, and my objective is to get these organizations to listen and start implementing this protocol. And that protocol is continue to identify good prospective women leaders, and then to put a advocate for them, advocate on their behalf, and then get them into the training. And what's interesting, Beth, is that I was at my doctor's office earlier this morning, and I was talking to him about I'm going to Paris. And he said, well, what are you going to be talking about? I said, about developing women. He said, well, how do you do that? And I told him, well, you become you have to identify, then you have to advocate for, and then you have to get them through leadership training. He said, that's exactly what my daughter is doing for a major corporation right now. He said, that's exactly what she's doing. I said, I know.
beautiful,
And
beautiful.
the thing is, I had spoken at that company where his daughter works at.
Oh, well, you see that? You had that influence. They had the
Yeah,
right leader. That is a great story. That
yeah,
is, I just want to share
sure.
with our audience how people can get back in touch with you because you have so much to share, which means there's so much for them to learn. And again, we go back
Sure.
to that constant, continuous, lifelong learning.
Sure.
And they can just go right here, press this button. That will connect you to the wonderful Paul Lawrence Vann,
Uh-huh.
who can help you identify and accept your own leadership.
Right.
And I think we all have it in us. It's kind of like the food chain. You don't
Yeah.
have to be the leader, but somewhere on the food chain, you're leading, even if it's just, I don't want to say just yourself, that
Sure.
probably is where it starts.
Yes, it's that point of just starting to learn, and to be able to learn, you have to be interested in learning. See, that's the key point.
Yes,
And people look at leadership only as what we call a lifelong learning, but leadership is actually a system. It's a program. It's a process in which people can become a part of and really want to do it. And I think that when we look at employee turnover, we look at leaders. There's about 15 to 20% each year for leader turnover for corporations due to acquisitions, due to poor revenue generation, et cetera. And then for employees is more in the 20 to 30% range.
wow,
And so we want to stop the talent management from leaving. The
right.
talent from leaving, that's one of the
And
key.
companies, I've actually trained on that a little bit. Companies has to realize the cost of that
Oh,
turnover to them.
oh my God, you just touched on a beautiful point because it costs a lot more to train a new employee than an existing employee.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly.
yes,
So much practicality in here. And we always hope the best for everybody, of course, but especially for the young people, because I think that they do have so many challenges. I think that technology, as wonderful as it can be, has complicated the lives of many, and that younger people have become more introverted
yeah,
because, this is their best friend.
right,
This is
exactly.
their best
There,
friend.
like you
So
said, there's nothing wrong with a phone, but you have to be judicious with it. That if that's the only thing that you're relying on, you're going to always come up short because it's the computer or the phone is limited to man and women and what we input into it.
Well, there you go. There
Yeah,
you go. So we're grateful for the technology that we can get to
yeah,
meet someone as wonderful as you, and that you can share such wonderful pearls of wisdom with our audience. And now they know how to connect directly back to you. All you have to do is go and click that button, and you will connect with Paul Lawrence Vann. So I thank you so much for being today's guest on B.E.P Talks.
it's
We are always so proud to bring talented, knowledgeable folks like yourself
true.
and share your wisdom. You truly are a leader. So again, thank you for your service.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for
Beth.
sharing information today. And to our viewing audience, we always say thank you. And until we
Yeah,
talk again, may the best always be yet to come. Bye for now.
thank you so much.